discussion, holding big tech accountable, is reforming Section 230 the answer? Social media platforms like Facebook are under attack for their amplification of extremism, racism, lies, and violence. Some people say reforming or repealing Section 230 is the answer, while others point to more nuanced policy options to create a healthier online experience for young people and for democracies. I am Kyle Taylor from the Real Facebook Oversight Board, and I'm so honored to be moderating this panel today with Representative Jan Schakowsky, Consumer Protection and Commerce Subcommittee Chair at the House Energy and Commerce Committee, James P. Steyer, Stanford professor and founder and CEO at Common Sense, Gaurav Laroya, Senior Policy Counsel at Free Press, and Damian Collins, MP, co-founder of the International Grand Committee on Disinformation, and of course, a member of British Parliament. Let's just get right into it. Jim, I want to start with you, if that's all right. Section 230 has sort of been framed in so many different ways as complicated, simple. Can you sort of give us the entry-level explainer, what this is, what it's meant to do?
Sure, Kyle, and great to see folks. Basically, Section 230 has been a get-out-of-jail-free card for the social media platforms for over 20 years. It's a section of the 1996 Communications Decency Act, and it essentially says that platforms like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube are not liable for the content on their platforms. And so these social media platforms and online platforms in general and their algorithms have been inciting and amplifying misinformation, hate, racist messages, et cetera. And because of the protections of Section 230, you basically can't hold the platforms accountable. That's a big issue from a kid's standpoint, but it's really important from a democracy standpoint, misinformation, hate speech, et cetera. So essentially, we have to have platform accountability. I think it's even more than just reforming Section 230, which is a part of it, but we have to have broader platform accountability where the Facebooks and Instagrams and YouTubes are held accountable for the content on their platform.
Thanks so much, Jim. And I think that Section 230 is so many other issues have sort of emerged in the time that this has become a central part of the conversation. I just want to ask Gaurav Laroya from Free Press, from your perspective, what are those additional issues and what else do you, from your point of view, needs to be done in this space to hold big tech to account?
Sure. Thanks for having me on. I think re-examining 230 is certainly part of the puzzle here. There are, I think, other ways forward that we need to examine towards reining in big tech abuses. For instance, I think at Free Press, we want to examine the business model that monetizes attention in a way that encourages the most radical and hateful speech. We should study and audit recommendation algorithms. We need to pass a data privacy law that puts a stop to the unyielding collection of our data and one that protects our civil rights. I think we have to have control over how our personal information is used. We must prohibit its use to build systems that oppress, discriminate, disenfranchise, and exacerbate segregation. Our other big proposal is we're interested in taxing the ad revenues of online platforms and redistributing that money to local, non-commercial journalism that meets the needs of diverse communities as a way to charge social media companies for their negative impacts on our news and information ecosystem, and then fight disinformation with better local news. So as I said, it's a multi-pronged approach to reining in big tech.
Absolutely, and I think the debate around 230 has really allowed for the conversation to flourish, and as a centerpiece to much needed reform. Can I bring in Jan now? Jan, I'm really interested. I want to hear your thoughts on Section 230 and how to incorporate this. But I want to start with the fact that you put out a really important letter on January 7th, the day after the insurrection, and you said that leadership at Facebook needs a complete overhaul. You're going to be seeing Mark Zuckerberg face to face, well, through virtual, as close as we get to face these days, on Thursday. Will you be asking him for his resignation?
Well, Mark Zuckerberg has said that he really is interested in regulation. We're going to quiz him on that, but we're also, when we sent that letter, it was a request for information, and we've been the platforms, the tech companies have been really challenging us in giving this information. But I want you to know that in Congress, there is a bipartisan agreement that the status quo is just not working. And nowhere is this more evident than right now in the subcommittee. You mentioned that I'm chair of the Consumer Protection and Commerce Subcommittee. Our members are very enthusiastic right now and anxious to go. There are a number of bills. Let me mention some of them later. They're very, very energized. But along with these opportunities that we have, because people are ready for it, we have seen the challenges that you mentioned, all the bad actors that are stalking online marketplaces, using deceptive techniques and to influence consumers, deceptive design to fool them to lose their money. And so consumers everywhere, certainly in America, are feeling helpless. And I think it's true around the world, in the digital world. And disinformation and misinformation are running rampant right now. You mentioned hate and violence. Of course, we saw it just this last week on the murders, and also on January 6th, the horror, and continues to resonate right now. Big tech has failed to respond to these grave challenges time and time again. And, underlying all of this is Section 230 of the Consumer, the Communications Decency Act, which provided online platforms like Facebook a liability shield, as was described. And making matters worse, of course, the COVID-19 crisis has only further laid this bare. So that's why I have drafted and going to very soon introduce the Online Consumer Protection Act. It's gotten great feedback from members. The only real negative feedback has come from the platforms themselves. And so consumers and parents feel helpless, and we want to resolve that. So I wanted to just tell you some of the provisions that are in that bill, and just a couple of other bills that have been introduced by members of my subcommittee, and then get to the Q&A. So we require social media platforms and online marketplaces to establish, disclose, and maintain written terms of service. Required disclosures include how the platforms handle health misinformation, disinformation about elections, disinformation and misinformation about all kinds of things that we have seen. So that's another item, require social media platforms and online marketplaces to establish a consumer platform, a consumer protection program, and this would ensure that that we have compliance with the rules that they set out. Hold companies accountable when they fail, when they fail to address these consumer problems, and directs the FTC to issue rules under the regular rulemaking right now, and allows the FTC to seek civil penalties for violations of this act. This section allows providers, this section also provides for a private right of action by individuals who are harmed by the violations of this act, and invalidates I'm sorry, I'm going to skip over that right now. Also,
That's all right.
Go ahead. What?
No, I was just going to ask you a quick follow-up about an aspect of that, but did you want to finish?
Yeah, I do want to say a few more things. The bill requires a transparent disclosure and appeal process, which is very important for removal of content and deplatforming. Importantly, the bill clarifies Section 230 so that it does not limit liability with respect. Well, it does that it does not limit reliability with respect to violence of the violations of this act, and this section also explicitly states that this act does not prevent states from their own issues. But let me just mention a couple of other bills that my members of my subcommittee. Yvette Clarke has authored the Civil Rights Modernization Act, and Kathy Castor, and I'm sure Jim is interested in this, has drafted critical updates to the Children's Online Privacy Act, COPPA, and a content bill called the Kids Act. And these are super important. And lastly, I just want to say I don't want to step on my friend Damien's concern about Section 230 being put into trade agreements. That's what happened in the U.S. Canada-Mexico trade agreement, much to our dismay. And of course, the platforms want to have this liability shield in trade agreements, even as we are having this robust discussion about 230. And I'm hoping that Catherine Tai, who is the new U.S. Trade Representative, will be as stubborn as I am about making sure that that doesn't happen. So I know I went on longer than you wanted, but now if you have questions, I'm ready to take them.
Great. Well, I just want to thank you very much for that overview of the U.S. approach. I want to bring Damien in just quickly before we move to questions. Damien, obviously the UK is pursuing the Online Harms Bill. In Europe, there's the Digital Services Act and the European Democracy Action Plan. Of course, because these are U.S. companies, what role does U.S.-based regulation play in the broader global space? And what are you really hoping to see from the U.S. lead on in these areas?
Thank you, Kyle. And Jan's reminded me quite rightly that on the one hand, for the last year, the tech companies have been saying, we want regulation, and yet on the other, they've been actively lobbying for the free pass they get from Section 230 to be applied around the world, to prevent domestic parliaments legislating to place responsibilities on them. I mean, the approaches that have been taken are different, and that's why on Section 230 in particular, I raised in the House of Commons on numerous occasions the fact that we couldn't accept Section 230 in a UK-US trade agreement, because if we did, our ability to legislate on online harms and other areas where we want the companies to take responsibility for the content they profit from on their platforms, would be rendered almost impossible. It is hugely important what happens in America, and I think we've been very pleased to see. I've personally been very pleased to see some of the appointments the new administration has made, or is in the process of making, from Catherine Tai and Tim Wu, Bruce Reed, people who've been outspoken about the need for better regulation in the tech space and more responsibility. The one thing I think we have in common on both sides of the Atlantic, and in that sense, I'd include both the UK and the European Union, is the idea that we've got to end this system of liability protections for the tech companies, where they're making money out of content through advertising and through holding attention. They're playing a role curating and promoting and recommending that content to people. Then they need to be responsible and they need to be held to liabilities when things go wrong. And we also need the ability to see what's going on. Most of the self-regulation of these companies is based on self-reported data and information that no one can verify. So when Facebook says it removes 95% of harmful content before it's reported, well, how do we know? We know because that's what Mark Zuckerberg tells us, but we've got no way of properly checking. So the idea of responsibilities for how they act against against harmful content, and to protect consumer interests, as Jan has rightly said, so the sort of basic standards that apply offline apply in the online world as well. And the ability to see what's going on and challenge and hold the tech companies to account for the decisions they make. I think those are at the heart of the reforms we want to see around the world now.
You know, Kyle, can I just add something to what Damien said just briefly?
Yeah, I want to come to you and Gaurav. I just want to remind press, if you do have a question, to just pop it in the chat to CJ on our team. But yeah, go ahead, Jim, and then I want to ask Gaurav.
I think what our friend Damien said is really thoughtful, because as he knows, when we wrote, there is a privacy law in the United States that we wrote it in California and passed it in 2018. But we collaborated with colleagues in the UK and Europe to do the CCPA. And I think what you're going to see, which is why, and Damien is the most outspoken person in the UK Parliament on these issues. Thank you very much for that. But I think what you're going to see, whether it's platform accountability in Section 230 legislation, whether it's improved privacy protections, whether it's antitrust and competition legislation, which our colleague Tim Wu now just went into the government to do, I think you're going to see a really interesting collaboration now between federal legislation that Jan was referring to, legislation in the state of California, where most of the companies are housed. So we run legislation both in California and Washington. But then, as Damien mentioned, the online harms bill in the UK is huge, as are the DSM and the DSA, the big acts in the EU Parliament. So I think we are entering an extraordinarily important era where regulation is going to be happening. Not the kind of regulation Facebook is talking in their daily full-page ads in the New York Times and the Washington Post, which none of us take seriously, but really driven by consumer groups, folks in Congress like Jan, Damien in the UK. I think we're entering a critical moment in the next year or two. And 230 may be the entry issue, but this is about holding the individual companies accountable, and particularly, by the way, Facebook accountable for the many different ways in which they've had negative impacts on our democracy and our kids and other things.
Thanks, Jim. And Gaurav, I just wanted to, Jan outlined a suite of proposals that are working their way, being introduced and will be in Congress. Is this the type of approach you think is necessary based on what you're seeing in the communities that you work with? And what points do you think are just so key to this debate?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've, at Free Press, fortunately been able to work with Representative Schakowsky's office on a number of pieces of legislation. She did mention Representative Clark's algorithmic civil rights update, and I think civil rights being at the heart of these questions and anti-discrimination being at the heart of these questions is incredibly important. Representative Clark's bill, for example, says that on questions of ad targeting, civil rights law has to be respected by these companies. There's been some good precedent, there was a Facebook HUD agreement that they will no longer engage in housing discrimination. But the fact that there's so many hurdles to jump through to get them to be responsive to civil rights law is just untenable. And that, I think, the communities I'm talking about need that to be at the center of these reforms.
Thanks, Gaurav. And I just want to ask one follow-up to Jan, and then we'll move on to press questions. Jan, obviously, as the Real Facebook Oversight Board hosting this event, we're very concerned with the fact that the Trump ban has been referred to Facebook's own oversight board. Is there a risk that with a body like this set up by the company itself making these types of decisions around speech and reach?
Oh, I think absolutely. I think that, the whole question of what kind of speech, and that's what we want to say, that they have to I think the first item on this that require these social media platforms and online marketplaces to establish and disclose and maintain written terms of service. And based on that, they're going to have to disclose such things as how the platforms handle health misinformation and all other kind of misinformation that is, and that would be prohibited. So I absolutely think that we have to monitor, and that's what's tricky about 230, right? We don't want to limit freedom of speech. On the other hand, we have to make the kinds of reforms that I've been talking about. So yes.
Yeah, and it is a sort of Sheryl Sandberg said as well after the January 6th insurrection. I think these events were largely organized on platforms that don't have our abilities to stop hate and don't have our standards and don't have our transparency. The Justice Department report showed that nearly half of all individuals had found out about it or organized the insurrection on a Facebook-owned product. Do you think that they know the truth and they're just lying? Or do you think that at the executive level, they genuinely believe that their companies don't play a role in these spaces?
Oh, I absolutely think they know. This is all about the extremism, brings more eyeballs and is very profitable. So I think they know. If they don't know, then that is totally irresponsible, and they have to be held accountable in any case. We didn't know is absolutely not going to be an excuse, but I can't imagine that they don't. I'm sure they do.
Thank you, Jen. All right, let's go to these press questions. Cristiano Lima from Politico has the first question. Cristiano, do you want to ask it? Oh, great, thank you. Oh, Cristiano, excuse me.
Yeah, hi. Thank you all so much for having this and for opening up to questions. My question's for the Congresswoman. You had mentioned that there's obviously a number of proposals that have been introduced, both in the House and Senate, dealing with Section 230 reform specifically. But I'm wondering, where do the discussions stand about actually moving some of these proposals to a markup and getting them out of the committee?
Well, we're talking about introducing the legislation soon, maybe even by the end of the week. And we have been meeting and talking to the Senate as well, which is very important. And we've been talking to the Republicans on a regular basis as well. I think it's really important that we start introducing these bills because there's been just years and years of we need to address this, we need to address that, we need to address 230, and so far it really hasn't gelled. And so we need to do that. I plan to do that after we have a hearing on Thursday. We've got Jack Dorsey from Twitter. We've got Sundar how do we say his name? From Pichai from Google, and of course we have Mark Zuckerberg coming as well. And as I said, Mark will say, "Oh well, we think there ought to be regulation." I do want to hear what he has to say, but the truth of the matter is, we'll see what we've seen are apologies and excuses, time after time, or just ignoring us. And so the time has run out. Now we have to get these out there in legislative language.
One quick follow-up, if I might, and then I'll take myself off. You alluded to the fact that Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg and some other industry leaders have begun to express some openness to potentially tweaking Section 230. We've already heard on this briefing today that there's some skepticism about how they might seek to influence legislation. I was just wondering what you made of sort of the industry's, and particularly Mark Zuckerberg's, remarks about potential tweaks to Section 230. I'm happy to hear from others as well.
Well, I mean, we have heard this song and dance for a very long time, but actually being able to limit some content to require them to not put things online. I can't see them just succumbing to any kind of major 230 reform. And, it'll be interesting to see what they think reform looks like.
The only thing I would add, Cristiano, is the companies are not the same. They're not similarly situated. So if you look at how effective we've been in California in passing major legislation, Congress has not yet, but hopefully we will see that in 2021. But what we've done is you break the industry. They're not the same. Facebook has very different business model than Apple does or Microsoft or Salesforce. And that's how that's what's going to happen. Whether it's 230, whether it's enhanced privacy legislation, even some of the antitrust stuff, the companies are not the same. It's not one monolithic industry. So I think you shouldn't just speak of big tech as one group where they all agree. Sundar Pichai does not agree with Mark Zuckerberg on a lot of things, and Jack Dorsey doesn't either. They're all ad-based models. But if you had Tim Cook from Apple up there or Mark Benioff from Salesforce, you would see that they have a very different perspective on this. And I think that's going to be critical because it is not a monolithic industry. The ad-based companies, Facebook, Google, et cetera, have been trying to, and the ones that have the big social media platforms, they're the same companies, have been very dominant in pushing back on federal legislation. But I think that's about to change. But part of it is because the companies are not all the same and they need to be split. And that's true over in the EU and in the UK where Damien is as well. So I think that's going to be part of the solution is the companies, some of the companies are going to agree with really far-reaching legislation. Maybe Facebook won't, but others
That's
will.
why I look forward to that. And if you say Pichai has a different view than Zuckerberg, I think that'll make it even a more interesting hearing if they're disagreeing with one another. So I look forward to that.
I think
Damien, did you want to start?
I think in the in the EU, in the UK, and in America, you're seeing a twin track approach. Well, there's really three parts to it. There's data protection, antitrust, and content moderation. And I think you're seeing action on all those things. And what Jan's laid out today as well around consumer protection is a kind of a very important part of that as well. So it is not it's not just one solution. There are a number of different problems. But on the whole question of regulation, though, I mean, I think something we've obviously, as the real Facebook Oversight Board, spoken about, which is if Facebook's idea of self-regulation is the Facebook Oversight Board, it gives you an idea of just how weak it is. A body that can't initiate its own investigations, can't look. There are big areas of platform activity like groups and advertising, which has no role in at all. It can't audit the use of the algorithm to promote and recommend content to users, and has no ability to actually go and seek data and information from Facebook and obtain it only to request it. And whatever you look at the debate, particularly Facebook advances around the world about what regulation should look like, it's largely based on enforcing only their own platform policies and reporting based on self-declared information which can't be audited or checked. And that is totally inadequate. And I think the lesson around the world is they will only do different when legislation requires it.
Thanks, Damien. I want to go next to Shannon Bond from NPR.
Hi, thanks for taking the question.
Hi, Shannon.
Hi, so my question is for Representative Schakowsky. You mentioned that you've asked for information from these companies ahead of the hearing, and they've been challenging at how they've responded to those requests. Can you say any more about what specifically you've asked for and what they're refusing to provide?
Let me see if I have that on. Hold on one sec. I want to see where that is.
Did anyone else want to come in while Jan is?
Come in, yeah.
I mean, I guess, more broadly to the rest of you, I mean, I wonder what kind, this is an opportunity to ask these companies, for more disclosure. What are some of the key points you think we don't know yet, we haven't heard from them addressed completely that you would like to see?
Gaurav, do you want to? What's the top question?
Well, yeah. Let's say if I were able to ask Mark Zuckerberg a question. So the FTC issued a $5 billion fine and set up some reporting structures at Facebook regarding privacy, for example. I'm very curious to see how that's actually working and where these structures have failed or succeeded. The key point is they recently released WhatsApp data to be able to use that data for advertising. This is a massive privacy violation. It led a lot of customers to exit WhatsApp. But they are supposed to have instituted like a privacy oversight board inside the company, and it doesn't seem to have been working, right? They went ahead with their commercialization plans regardless. And I think, examining these kinds of structures the government is setting up to regulate Facebook is pretty important.
Thanks, Gaurav. Damien, do you want to
come back? Let me just come back and say that we can provide that letter to the reporters that want it.
Great.
Okay.
Can I just ask one more, just for a related question? I mean, obviously, Facebook gets a lot of the attention in these cases. I think that there are increasingly people who are saying, YouTube has really escaped as much scrutiny. This is a chance to ask Sundar Pichai about, not just Google in general, but YouTube specifically. What are the questions you might put to him about YouTube? I'll go off camera.
Well, we certainly want, I mean, there's been some pretty bad things on YouTube. We're concerned, and we're dealing with it also in the COPPA, the revised COPPA bill, of none of the platforms actually making sure that children they all say that they have policies that deal with up to 13 years old, which I think actually is too young. But they nonetheless are not really monitoring that, and children are exposed. And I think one of the most important things, and I think Jim would agree, is making sure that the internet is safe for kids. So we will want to talk to them about that.
Just before I ask the next question, I just wanted to ask Damien, who has tried to get, in particular, Mark Zuckerberg to appear and answer questions here in the UK, what his number one question for Mark Zuckerberg would be, were he to have shown.
Well, I think some of this, we started off during the Cambridge Analytica scandal. What was the result of the app audit Facebook did at the time of Cambridge Analytica to see whether other apps were harvesting data illegally as well? There's never been a report back on that. Last year, he was asked about the investigation in 2016 that Facebook suppressed a report of, showing that 64% of people in Germany that joined groups that was disseminating extremist content did so at Facebook's recommendation. And he said last year the company had learned from that. Well, what did it learn? What's it done? Has it stopped it? How do they look back at what happened on the 6th of January and say, well, we're confident that we didn't play a role in amplifying those messages and making the situation worse. So, is it okay to plan an insurrection on Facebook and invite people to it on Facebook, but it only becomes a problem when the violence starts? And is it right that he decides?
Oh, I would agree with that. I mean, channeling people into these groups has been a real profit center for them. I don't know about center, they have a lot of centers. But I would agree that they have done nothing to curb that.
Thanks, Jan. All right, we've got a stack of questions now, so I'll just keep going. Next is from Ruth Reeder from Fast Company.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Ruth. Yes, we can hear you. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. So I really want to know, and this is from everybody, Jan, but I'll start with you. How do you plan to hold these companies accountable? I know you've talked a bit about the FTC and equipping them with the ability to do that, but I would love to talk a little bit more finely about it, in part because not only do these companies have a lot of money and legal resources, but also, let's talk about health misinformation for a minute. The companies have said that they've done numbers of things to take down that health misinformation repeatedly. I mean, they've come out with a new announcement every couple of months. And yet there's tons of health misinformation on the web, on these social media platforms, and researchers who are involved in several Facebook groups where this stuff proliferates even have a hard time keeping tabs on it, because all of the platforms do a good job of trying to hide it rather than get rid of it. So if you could just talk to me a little bit about the accountability piece, that would be great.
You know, the accountability piece, we have not seen the FTC have the kind of resources, the expertise, the number of people. I mean, if you compare what we have with what Great Britain has in terms of the staffing, the expertise, it's nothing by comparison. So a big part of this is going to have to be is going to have to provide the Federal Trade Commission with the ability and all the resources that they need to do this kind of oversight. Otherwise, we just, you know, if we don't have a cop on the beat here, and we don't have the laws that allow the FTC to move forward, then we, of course, are not going to get anywhere. And that's why it's time for both the regulation and the legislation to be intensively beefed up. And that's the way that we're going. So, you know, if you're thinking about the current Federal Trade Commission and the numbers and the expertise, that wouldn't work. But we have a new acting head of the FTC, and I think there's a lot of enthusiasm on their part for doing this work.
So Ruth, I would agree with what Jan just said. So Becca Slaughter is going to be way tough. Look, the FTC was missing in action in the last 4 years. And actually it was missing in action largely in the second Obama term too, unfortunately. So the Federal Trade Commission is going to be key. You have a new acting chair. You have a new acting chair, by the way, at the Federal Communications Commission, which is also relevant. So you have Becca and you've got Jessica Rosenworcel now at the FCC, and they need resources. Congress has to provide the resources. But I think the other things are twofold. One, the state AGs are really important. The attorneys general are critical to this. So if you look at, say, the privacy area, where the law of the land in the United States is the California Consumer Privacy Act, right? So the AG has to enforce that. That was Javier Becerra, but he just became Secretary of HH&S. So Gavin's going to appoint a new AG in California. But there's both the ability for the AGs to do that. They also brought the antitrust case against Facebook. So in fact, there is a big antitrust case now against Facebook, which I think is that you cannot ignore the antitrust pressure. I mean, I would actually tell you, Jan, you ought to say to Zuckerberg very bluntly to him, that you believe they should be forced to divest themselves of Instagram and WhatsApp. So yep. I actually think you should absolutely say that, and because we've called for that, and our friend Tim Wu, who just went into the National Economic Council, wrote all that up with us last year. But you're going to see enforcement is the FTC and the FCC, which were basically mute bodies for the last 4 years at the federal level. But you also have state AGs and then private rights of action. So when Jan mentioned that there's a private right of action, that's critically important. Now, we don't have that in the California Consumer Privacy Act, because honestly, we bargained it away when that was what we had to bargain away when we passed the legislation. But you do have private rights of action that will really hold the companies accountable, not just Facebook, it's also Google and others. But I do think that the other piece that's going to be critical is antitrust, because that's the existential threat to Google, Facebook, and others.
And I think you know, Jim, that David Cicilline and the Judiciary Committee is absolutely, they did a big report and they're absolutely on top of this as well. It's not the jurisdiction of my subcommittee, but I certainly agree with that.
Damien, Jan mentioned the sort of resource. Oh, sorry, Ruth, I'll come back to you. I was going to ask a quick follow-up of Damien. Sorry. Jan mentioned the resourcing in the UK being much greater. I wondered if you wanted to comment on that before, and then Ruth, I'll come back to you. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, but I think it's still something we're looking to do more with. So this year, the Competition and Markets Authority will establish the Digital Markets Unit. We'll pass legislation this year as well to give that unit additional powers. I mean, we can take action in the UK for abuse of market power against a company trading in the UK, but this is, I think, where the new administration and new leadership in America is going to be so important, I think, for our response to the antitrust side of this issue. But I think I think that's where we do need active coordination, I think, between governments in understanding the approach we're going to take and understanding where we think the abuses are occurring. And I think through America and in the EU with the Digital Markets Act, the Commission published last year as well, I think we can see that too. So I think the better coordination on that issue, I think, will be really important in the year ahead.
One follow-up
Go ahead, Ruth.
asked to my question was, do you think that there is an opportunity, or would you be interested in creating a new agency that is perhaps flexible, like the Consumer Financial Board of Protections for the financial services industry, that can respond to an evolving landscape of technology, that can perhaps legislate sort of more flexibly? Or do you think that this can be done entirely by existing agencies like FTC, FCC?
So my concern about creating a new agency is that postpones a lot of the work that needs to be done right now. I'm not, deeply opposed to that idea, but I have been around when we set up the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, it takes a lot to set up a new separate agency. So, I think we need to get started on the regulations, and the legislation right now. And we can continue to have that conversation if it is clear that there's a big hole there that needs to be filled or better filled by a separate agency. But I'm not interested in getting broiled down right now in the creation of such.
If I could just add as well, I think you're right to, first I agree totally with what Jana said, and certainly the approach in the UK has been considering giving additional role to existing agencies rather than creating new agencies. But I think financial service regulation, whilst not perfect, just shows you that you can create rules for a complex international industry where there are clear standards you expect companies to meet. If evidence is found that they've failed to meet them, there is a sanction that can be applied. And I think something that's interesting in America, obviously it's done through the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, in the UK through the Bribery Act, the idea of saying to a business or a citizen that they could be held to account for their actions anywhere in the world, not just within their home jurisdiction as well. And I think that would be a really interesting thing to think about how that would work in the tech space.
Thanks, Damien. Next question is from Tyler Adkisson from Newsy. Tyler?
Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. My question is for the Congresswoman. Given the fact that we have seen just a number of different proposals for changing Section 230 from both Republicans and Democrats, I do sort of wonder about whether or not you think that there's going to be more of a bipartisan approach to this in this coming administration, just given the fact that while it seems that both Republicans and Democrats want to change this law, they are coming from two kind of different camps. On the conservative end, it seems like they've been talking a lot about the way that Section 230 works on so-called conservative censorship, whereas Democrats have really pushed for this in order to hold tech companies more accountable for the kind of ills on their platform.
Well, some of the Republicans have said that the answer to bad speech is more speech, and so are absolutely coming from a different place. But we have seen that there is concern about how the platforms are held accountable by both the Republicans and the Democrats. Just a little example, both the chairman and the ranking member last session of Congress signed a letter saying that Section 230 should not be included in trade agreements. So I think we'll be able to find a common ground here and be able to pass it with Republican support as well.
Got it. That's all I had. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Jan. Gaurav, did you want to comment on this?
Yeah. I want to say that the quality of tech reform proposals and certainly Section 230 proposals has markedly improved since the end of the last administration. And I do want to point out that, Donald Trump's, for example, Section 230 executive order, had serious First Amendment implications. The idea that, the Republican side of the aisle wanted to use the occasion of Section 230 reform to, in fact, protect bigoted speech and hate speech online. was a very serious problem. Free Press joined a suit about the unconstitutionality of that order, and so there's been a sea change in the seriousness about these proposals, and we're very happy to see that. But the First Amendment concerns for some of these things still lurk out there. So I think bipartisan cooperation is working on the PACT Act, but there's I think other places where we won't see that happen.
Thanks, Gaurav. And next question is from Margaret McGill from Axios. And if you do have a question, just drop it in the chat to CJ. Go ahead, Margaret.
Okay, hi everybody, and thank you for doing this. My question is mainly for the Congresswoman, but obviously open to hearing from everybody on this. Looking ahead to the hearing on Thursday, we've seen these tech CEOs come to the Hill multiple times now. There's a lot of grandstanding, and then things don't really change. And so I'm wondering what will set this hearing apart? What's different this time, and what do you expect will happen next afterward?
Well, I think the message that we want to send is that we're done with conversation and that we're now moving toward action and that it's inevitable. And so they either need to participate and understand that, or we're going anyway. I mean, it doesn't matter. And I think, if as I look back on all the hearings, one of the last ones where Mark Zuckerberg was there, I just gave a litany of the apologies that they had made. By the way, one of them had to do with Myanmar, where Facebook actually played a role. Zuckerberg said, yeah, we caught it too late. We're so sorry about that. And the genocide against the Rohingya people. So that's not going to work anymore. And I think that's why we want them to understand how seriously they better take this. And because it's going to happen. It's no more just talk.
Margaret, did you have a follow-up?
I guess to follow up, is there legislation that's also coming that will be tied to the hearing? I mean, how do you express that it's not just talk anymore?
Well, I have a bill that I'm going to introduce. We have at least two that I mentioned earlier from the committee members. There are all kinds of bills that are out there right now that are under this administration and with our now running. I can't say controlling the Senate, but now that we have a majority in the Senate, we'll see how that can go. I think there's a good chance that this legislation this time, and there'll be more than one bill for sure, will pass and have a life beyond the House of Representatives.
And Margaret, Mark Warner has a pretty good 230 bill that we're behind. I think Free Press, Mark has already put that in. We came out in support of it a few weeks ago. Ed Markey has a really good bill called the Kids Act that has to do with intentional design and attention addiction distraction issues that the platform do, who's been one of the key guys. He wrote that. He's been around for as long as they've been tech legislation. I think you're also going to see, and I always bring this up because if you really see how it's worked in the United States over the past 5 years, the state of California is the other key, Sacramento is the other key place for major legislation. And we have a major platform accountability there that mirrors what you're going to see in Congress. And you also are going to have enhanced privacy legislation as well. So I think Jan is completely correct. The bills are lining up. The question is merging the Senate bills with the House bills and then getting bipartisan support for them. But I think you're going to see a couple of these things clearly pass. And the antitrust stuff, even Cicilline's stuff, is important, but that's already in action. You've got a big case against Google out there right now, and you got a big case against Facebook, and they're going to move. That doesn't require congressional action. So I think you're really going to see stuff. And as actually Kyle mentioned earlier, and Damian mentioned this, you've got Bruce Reed, who was my closest colleague at Common Sense Media for the last 4 years as Deputy Chief of Staff in the White House, who wrote a piece about why 230 is bad for kids. You've got Tim Wu in the government. You've got some really important people now in the administration. So I think you're going to see stuff from the House, stuff from the Senate, stuff from the White House, and your real action happening this year. And that's big. And that's why Facebook's running those bogus ads every day in the paper saying, please regulate us, because they know it's coming and they should know it's coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. I have a follow-up to that. If we've talked about the genocide of Myanmar that was facilitated on Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg himself referred to the Kenosha shootings and the activity on Facebook around that as an operational mistake. And of course, the insurrection on January 6th. On Thursday, are you going to ask Mark Zuckerberg for answers on how he allowed these things to take place on Facebook and hold him accountable?
Guaranteed. It's just not enough to regret it, to say that we'll do better when the examples of not doing better are in our heads forever and proximate as well. So yes.
What's your sort of central message to him on Thursday?
Well, as I said, I think the central message is that the performance that they've shown us to date is largely, much of it, unacceptable, that we are moving ahead with legislation and with regulation, and know it's happening.
Thank you. And Damien, I just wanted to, if we're just doing last round of any final questions, if you have them, please message to CJ. Damien, I just wanted to ask you a question as a member of the Real Facebook Oversight Board, Jim as well, Gaurav, and then of course, Jan's role in Congress. The question about Donald Trump and the referral to the Oversight Board, the root of that is really grounded in free speech and who decides who has speech. Does it worry you, Damien, as a precedent-setting exercise to put that type of power in a board created by a company?
Well, it can't rest just with them. There has to be some outside standard that they meet or don't meet, and if they make the wrong decision, some body that has the ability to call them to account. But crucially, the ability of a regulator to be able to see the sort of metadata from within the company to say, okay, well, were the signals there that there was a problem with this content? Could you have done something earlier that you chose not to do? And what was the consequences of that action? And those are the sorts of steps that we have to find a way of scrutinizing and holding companies to account over that. It can't just be left to them or their own oversight board to determine whether or not the right decision is made. There has to be an external measure that we set. I think it throws open a really interesting question as well about the whole notion of incitement. Under the Supreme Court ruling, the Brandenburg ruling, I mean, incitement really is kind of an immediate, imminent, credible threat of illegality. That means your freedom of speech rights don't apply. But actually, what about the effects over a longer period of time of incitement to commit a particular act at a certain date in the future? But that's done over several months, where it's not maybe one individual message that's responsible, but the whole effect. And I think that is something that we have to think about as well. And what responsibilities the company should take in that situation, and how we determine whether or not they've lived up to it.
Thanks, Damien. I think we'll just go, if that's all right with everyone, for final comments. Jim, Gaurav, and then we'll finish with the Congresswoman, if that's all right. Jim.
This is a big moment, and Congresswoman Schakowsky is a good leader. We're so glad to have you here and doing this. I think this is the moment. It's not just for accountability, but I think for action. I think that Representative Schakowsky said that. I think you're going to see significant legislation, not just introduced, but passed this year. But also, we're going to have the regulatory piece at the Federal Trade Commission and the Federal Communications Commission enhanced. So Congress has to support that with money. But I also think that having Damien here is really important, because I think the international cooperation with the UK, whether it's the Online Harms Bill or the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Acts in the EU, are going to be critical. So I think finally, we're going to see in 2021 major step forward in holding Facebook accountable, much more than it has in the past, but all the companies. And that's a very positive path ahead, I think, in the coming months.
Thanks so much, Jim. Gaurav?
Yep. You listen to the long list of legislation and projects that Representative Schakowsky mentioned, right? This is a multi-pronged approach to a relatively complicated problem, but it is very heartening to see that the government is taking it seriously. Congress is taking it seriously. The question of resources and authorities, the regulatory agencies, is finally being addressed. And I think it is inevitable. We're going to see bold, strong action, and I think the companies know that.
Thanks, Gaurav. And Jan.
I just want to say thank you to the really great advocates who have contributed to the work that we're doing on the subcommittee and the legislation and the regulation that we're putting forward. We absolutely couldn't do it without the people who are focusing on this all the time. I want to thank Damien. I think his input from across the pond has been very, very helpful, and I look forward to continuing to work with him. But I'm just I'm thankful for all the help that there's been. The American people are crying out for trust in the going on online and believing that they are not going to be harmed. And there are so many harms that are happening right now, and we're going to proceed ahead with the help of all of the experts who believe that this has to happen. So thank you.
Thanks so much. Damien, I realized I didn't offer you a final word.
If I could just say, it's great to be with you all and with Jan in particular, and I wish her and all the members of the subcommittee well for the hearing. The world will be watching. The hearing may be being organised in Congress, but the world will be watching. And I think with all of these actions, whenever a parliament or a Congress or a government anywhere in the world does something important and new to try and redress the balance of power that away from the interests of the big tech companies and back towards the people, I think we all watch with great interest, and we all think about what that means in our own jurisdictions as well. So every one of these hearings, I think, is important to everyone around the world.
Great. Thank you so much, Damien, and to Jim at Common Sense, Gaurav at Free Press, and of course, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky. It was a privilege to host you all here at the Real Facebook Oversight Board. Have a lovely rest of your day, and we'll be watching so closely on Thursday, Jan, so stick it to him.
Okay, it'll be fun.
Take care.
Thank you. Good to see everybody.